Welcome to the Mentoring Moments, Empowering Leaders to Mentor Our Future podcast. I am Dr. Rob Wadawa and believe that through teacher and leader mentorship, we can impact our future through our influences on students. As much as we believe in the power and impact of mentorship, many shy away from this rewarding work. The goal of these episodes is to lean into the work with teachers and leaders, hear their stories, and have fun with the mentoring process. Welcome everyone to Mentoring Moments. I am super excited to be here with a good friend of mine for many years. So my question is what if the most powerful school leaders aren't in the main office, but are in the art room, covered in clay and passion? This is my very good friend, Dan Brazil, an art teacher at Longwood Junior High School for 19 years, a set designer, a field trip pioneer, and the 2023 Pillar of Community Award winner. While he's been teaching kids to see the world differently, he's also been building a masterclass in leadership from the inside out, running the most popular club in school, raising money to take over 88 students to museums every single year, and connecting his classroom to the heart of the community through the Patchogue Arts Council. I can say personally, he was the first person I observed as part of my administrative program, and it was my first project, and I cannot thank him enough for allowing me to be in his classroom and take advantage of that first observation. Today, we're going to be flipping the script. We're talking about leadership lessons you can only learn from a classroom, the art of building community one student at a time, and what happens when a master teacher decides to step into a new kind of spotlight, maybe leadership. And Dan, welcome to Mentoring Moments. So how's it going?
It's going great, Rob. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to speak to you and your listeners about the arts in particular and its impact on education and, where we fit in and the unique challenges that we face as people who are teaching the arts.
Yeah, for a person that's been now leading the arts for over 14 years, it's been an amazing road for me to see the differences and to help guide people that don't know what we do to do understand what we do, what we do. And I also know that you've been dabbling also in the concept of leadership and talking about it for a couple of years, and so you're kind of on that precipice of being a teacher leader. Like one of the quotes I always say is teachers are leaders and leaders are teachers. And you're on that precipice of understanding that as a classroom teacher, you're leading kids. So let's talk about leadership in the classroom. So you've built an incredible following with your art club and all the field trips that you've been putting on. What is your secret of turning a subject like art into such a powerful community and leadership engine for the entire school and for your students?
I think, first and foremost, I think it was an interview with Elon Musk where he talked about teaching to not teaching to the tools, but teaching to the problem. And I think that that's what our subjects accentuate and cultivate in our students. Is the ability to look at a divine problem and be creative in the way that you solve it. And I don't think any other subjects really touch on that, unless, of course, the teacher of the subject is being very creative and imaginative and innovative in the ways that they teach. Was it Ken Robinson said that kids love learning, which we could all attest to, but they hate school. And we've all been teaching long enough to know that there are, significant problems and things that are broken in the public school model that are just being swept under the rug year after year. And we're just letting this broken machine just keep turning and turning and turning, where there are educational models in place like the KIPP schools and the Waldorf schools where the model is just working better and students are scoring off the charts on the college admissions exams. And, but public school for some reason is sticking to these things that haven't been working for so long, What was the
Yeah.
original question?
No, yeah, yeah, no. So, it's kind of funny because my second question kind of sort of ties into what you're talking about. So you're talking about teaching to the problem, and I was just speaking with a colleague yesterday actually about how, we're preparing students every single day for jobs and careers that don't exist yet, right? And you know and oftentimes we get into the weeds, like in New York State here, we're checking the boxes for regents exams, and students have to check those boxes to graduate. And I know that the portrait of a graduate in our state is moving towards kind of the pathways. So you talked a little bit about solving problems and learning, love learning and that process. So in the art classroom, what skills might you be using or encouraging students to kind of teach to the problem, solve those problems, and kind of using those soft skills? Because what I was talking about my colleague is, years ago I was talking about my dissertation. I was like, I wanted to do what essential skills do students need to be successful, right? And my chair was like, well, that's kind of like 21st century skills. It's kind of the soft skills. I'm like, yeah, it is, but those skills, in my opinion, and in opinions of a lot of people, and you share this notion, like if we can develop perseverance, problem solving, creativity, and all those soft skills in kids, chances are they'll be successful in the world. So, what might you do in your art room with your kids to inspire that type of problem solving?
I think kids need to understand the importance of what they're learning, and I think that that's a largely the responsibility of the teacher or the leader in your case, to help kids understand where this subject fits into their education, on on a macro level. So teaching kids that there's an art to everything. There's an art to doing everything in your life. And personally that even martial arts is just it's a lifestyle. It's learning something and becoming an expert at something so you can use it if you need it, but if you don't need it, it's still there, you know? So I think that the essential skills that I'm teaching in my classroom are life skills, not academic skills. And I think that that's where the arts kind of section off from the core subjects, where you're teaching kids how to apply the concepts to everything, not just in the confines of your specific subject.
Well, 100%. So let's flip the coin a little bit, right? So we're talking about student teacher kind of relationships, right? So now let's talk about what you would kind of give as advice to a teacher, right? So you've been in the classroom for 19 years working with kids, and so what do you believe are the most critical, I'll say leadership skills that teachers need to develop, right? That might work in kind of this what you're talking about, this unrecognized system. So what would you recommend for teachers for that?
I'm going to get a little more candid in this answer,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
that's okay.
yeah, 100%.
I feel like I feel like right out of school, I remember having, and I think a lot of teachers have this moment where you think, gosh, I didn't really learn much that I can apply here conceptually to the classroom. And, after almost 20 years, I feel like I've learned more on the job and continue to learn more on the job than I did in school on the whole. But one of the most poignant things that I learned, and I can tell you, I guess, a funny story that helped me kind of learn this concept is that as a teacher, especially if you're teaching the younger kids, you can't, and we all do it, knowing that it's not logical. You can't expect kids to act like adults. You can't expect a
Right.
kid to act like a grown up. Kids are kids. They're going to be silly. They're going to be disruptive. They're going to be loud. They're going to be possibly obnoxious and annoying at times. That's just being a kid, and you can't hold that against the kid. So the story that goes along with that was a day when I was having a particularly difficult day. I had a student that was, very likable, but constantly disrupting class. And we all know also as teachers that that's never for nothing. You always find out that there's something going on in their personal life and or in their private life that, kind of, I guess, makes them act out that way. And I had a moment where I said to the kid, why can't you just act right, man? Why can't you just not act like that? And he said to me, Mr. Brazil, I'm 12. What were you like when you were 12? And it was such a smack in the face of having such a mirror to me that I thought back to when I was 12 and I said, I was exactly like you. I was exactly like you. And maybe that's why it it uh, it triggers me, you know. So to a teacher, I would say two things: you can't expect kids to act like grown-ups, and if you do, you're the one that has the problem. It's something that you need to work on. And a great teacher is going to create opportunities for students to be silly in class and be loud and walk around and make connections. Because just like raising a child, Rob, it's like you don't force them into your world. You get down on the floor and meet them in theirs. And that's how you make strong, memorable, lasting connections with your students.
Love that. Meet them, meet them in their world. And it's funny that you say, kids can't be adults. I was literally talking to a high school teacher the other day, and we're talking about how teachers, especially veteran teachers at a secondary, more specifically at the high school, will often think of high school students as young adults. They'll treat them like adults. And I had a teacher years ago, an art teacher that literally would greet the kids as, "Hello, children, how's it going?" And we need to realize that these are still 16, 15, 14, 17-year-old children, and they need that support. And one of the advice that I give to people, and it's a silly piece of advice, but don't forget what it's like to be a kid yourself. And so that story that you just shared really hits home, where, the kid that your student recognized that, like, yo, bro, dude, you remember what you were like when you were 12? Like, that's so powerful, and so insightful for a middle school, a junior high student to be able to say that, like, wow, like that kid is brilliant. But so awesome. So as you bridge yourself from being a teacher, thinking about maybe the bigger picture, moving towards the, leadership, and someone who's looking maybe even going to the formal leadership process, what do you think is the biggest misconception that teachers have about what administrators actually do?
All right. With this one, I think I'm going to ask you a question because you're
Sure.
already an established leader, doing
Yeah.
great things, and are highly respected in your
Well,
field. And
thanks. Yeah, yeah.
so, do you feel that it should be a requirement to have extensive teaching experience before you have the opportunity to be a district leader or a building leader?
Great question, and that question pops up too in another realm where people will say something like, "Well, for you to be the superintendent of a school district, should you be sitting in all the seats before you move into that position?" For example, so where you're in a principal, an assistant principal, a director, so on and so forth, an assistant superintendent. And the way I'll answer that question is my belief is that good leader is a good leader. End of story. So what I've written about in the work that I've done is, and I've created this cycle. So I'm glad that you brought this up. So, a lot of people will, and you can Google this, management versus leadership, right? So what I talk about is you start as a teacher and you do a great job as a teacher, and then somebody taps you on the shoulder to be an administrator, so you move into that administrative role. And I differentiate between an administrator and a leader. So an administrator really is a manager. It's a person that's checking the boxes, trying to get the things done, as assistant principal, maybe a building principal. They don't understand what it's like, the psychology behind a leadership. And then as you learn, you pick up books like John Maxwell or Brené Brown. You understand what it's like to be vulnerable, and you understand how people tick, how people work. And like you said, it's about relationships. And I explain to people, we talk to teachers. You must differentiate to the children. You must differentiate to their experiences. You must get to their level and understand. Well, as a leader, I have to differentiate to my teachers. Every single teacher I work with is very, very different. And if I don't differentiate my leadership style to the people I'm working with, I'm never going to form a relationship with them, and they're never they're never going to follow me. So what I had said to somebody yesterday that was talking about becoming a leader, I said to them, if you study leadership as a scholar, you can actually skip the administrator role and move from teacher to leader as long as you understand that you're studying leadership. So my concept is after you become a leader, you then start to mentor teachers, help teachers, and understand that you're there to serve them and support them. And as you become a mentor to these new teachers, you eventually become back to being a teacher. So to answer your question, if you are doing administrative work, leadership work in the schools correctly, you will build the teaching skills as a leader and as you're growing. So I've seen successful leaders be teaching for 5 years. I've seen successful leaders be teaching for 2 years. I've seen, and we in our system you have to be in for 5 years anyway, minimum. But I've seen people like that have been successful with those 5 years that have moved all the way up to the superintendency that are successful. And some people will kind of like, snuff their nose at them, like, oh, they were only a teacher for 5 years, and now they were an AP for a year, and now they're a building principal, and now they're an assistant superintendent. If they're a good leader, they're a good leader. That's the end of the story. So that's how I answer that question.
Yeah, and the only follow up question I would have for that, and that was a great answer, definitely changed my paradigm on that whole concept, because I may at one point have been one of those people that said, maybe if we had more administrators that were veteran teachers, how would that, I've fantasized about how that would change the dynamic about how things are done administratively, and because they could empathize with what it is to be in a classroom and on the front lines and dealing with behaviors and standards and all the expectations of a teacher, and if people were required to be a teacher for 10 plus years, a classroom teacher for 10 plus years, how would that change the dynamic at the administrative level, or at the leadership level?
I will tell you that, so as a teacher, I taught 10 years before I became, a district leader. And, I taught a gamut of grade levels from fifth grade all the way to 12th grade with all the different areas of music education. So general music, band, chorus, all the way through. And I'll tell you, like, there is a level of teachers on the other side that will say things to me like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that you have the experience in this. I'm so glad you have the experience with that. And I think that there's a level of I don't know what the right word is, like false knowledge. Like they believe that because I've lived that I can empathize with them, right? But empathy is a skill that we all can develop over time, right? And how do we develop empathy? Like I always say, to listen twice as much as you speak. And I was just with John Gonzalez, and he talked about how we also listen with our eyes. So we should actually listen 4 times as much as we speak. And as a leader, there's been times like I was with my with a team member yesterday, and I actually said to my secretary, I said, "Did you see how hard it was for me to just not talk?" you know, and just listen to the person that was talking to me about a problem. And my secretary, she goes, "Yeah, you literally were like holding your shirt, like and like holding your like." But that's the truth. Like the teachers think that that this particular teacher is an art teacher. She's like, "You have 14 years leading art." She's like, "And that's great." And I'm like, "Yeah," and they know how to do this. I'm thinking, "Yeah, but as a good leader, I should know how to do anything because I'm just listening to you." And if I can listen to you and understand what your problem is and just say after they talk, say, and this is a great strategy that I've used. I did in a department meeting, I actually did this last week. People, laid out a problem and I said, okay, and I took some notes. I said, okay, so what I'm hearing from all of you is this, right? And I gave them what I was hearing and they were able to say, yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. And then, okay, so what's the solution there? And then we started building that solution. But at the end of the day, it's building that empathy skills, building those skills so we can understand, and I talk about listen to understand rather than listening to respond. So many leaders think that they need the answers, right? And we don't need the answers. We need the solutions from the people that are coming with us with the problems, because they're the ones that are in the trenches that know that the challenges. So thanks for
Yeah,
that.
listening to understand. It could also be called mindful listening, like
Hmm.
gathering information that's usable
Hmm.
in formation of the solution. So I think that's a great tactic, that you use. And
Now,
understanding your people as a leader, understanding your people. I remember somebody once told me that there's two types of leaders, right? And they told me a story from a situational aspect where they said somebody's having problems, one of your people, and they come into your office. You can either say, "What's your problem, man?
Hmm.
Why do you keep screwing up? What's your problem?" Like that, like come at it from a standpoint of not knowing any of the situational factors. Or you could say, you know, in a calm, quiet way, "Hey, man, what's going on?
Yep.
Are you okay? How can I help you?" And those, I think, the latter, I think, are the types of leaders that make an impact with their people and are trusted right out of the gate. And like you said, I mean, if you can't build relationships, you know, your people aren't even going to come to you with anything. And that's the biggest thing, is you have to be approachable, and they have to feel like they can come to you with anything. Again, like being a father,
Yeah.
which, if
Yeah.
you're great at that, you're probably going to be a great leader.
And it's funny. I talk about that with my teachers and with the people I work with. I was in a district for 10 years, and the people that I led, first year, second year, third year, all the way up to their sixth year. I joked with them. I'm like, well, I'm kind of like the papa of the department, and they literally like they had that feeling of like you're the father, and you care about us and you love us, and I genuinely, like, you read John Maxwell, you genuinely love your people, and be able to name their wives or their husbands and their kids and talk about all of those things. You got to know your people, and like you said, you got to be able to say, hey man, what's going on? Like like this isn't your normal way, and but if you come at it like nasty, it's just not going to, and that's why I went into leadership. If I approach people with kindness and empathy, hopefully that will trickle to them, and they'll treat their children with kindness and empathy, and then it grows from there. So you talked about two different types of leaders, and I wanted to kind of expand on that a little bit too, because we talked about management versus leadership, and you have what I call two different people. You have your lifters and your leaners. Right. So you'll often see in leadership, and probably in teaching too, you have your leaners are the people that kind of maybe lean on people, will take advantage of people, maybe take things that they didn't do or they're part of, they take credit for it. And the lifters are are the leaders, and I'm sure you've seen those images of like, a manager is kicking people off the rock because they want to get to the top of the rock, where a leader is the person that's pulling everybody up with them, and that's
Mm.
that lifter, right? So when you've been doing this now for 19 years and you're thinking about becoming, a leader yourself, what kind of strategies or ideas do you think you would use or build upon to become a lifter to the people in which you want to lead?
Well, so I'm in the school district leader program at St. Joseph's right now. I'm just taking my third class. I'm taking a law class right now, which is, everything I've been learning so far is just so interesting. I think the most difficult part of writing papers and stuff for the class is, you know, I guess picturing myself as a leader, or responding from the place of a leader, because I don't have experience being a leader, in the strictest sense. I've never been in a leadership position, although I am the senior person in my department, and I feel like people treat me as a leader in that regard, even though sometimes I feel like I don't really deserve it. It's 6 different established leadership styles. One is, great man leadership, where they talk about like Abe Lincoln, and how some people are, like you were saying earlier, like some people are just born with those leadership qualities, as far as, ability to speak, and integrity, and the ability to win people over, charisma, stuff like that. And then there's servant leadership, which I think is the one that resonated the most with me, where you the first thing you do is you humanize yourself to the people that you're leading, so they know that you're fallible, and you can use stories of places where you failed and recovered, and how you recovered, and that helps them field whatever difficulties they're currently fielding. And that, I feel like that's a great trait of a good lead, or a good sign of a good leader. a great leader. So I think for me, I would lead from a servant leadership um, standpoint. Although they do say that servant leaders often are taken advantage of um, by people who are leaners and looking to make excuses all the time for their actions. So I was thinking of that while you were telling your last story. Is like, do you feel like you struggle with being assertive when you've made excuses for someone and given them opportunities to grow and be better, and they haven't taken those opportunities?
It's a great question, and before I answer that, one of the things that you're talking about is being honest, right? And I have a thing on a poster on my in my office that says very few people can handle what does it say? Very few people can handle the truth, handle honesty, and you're talking about vulnerability, being vulnerable to the people in which you lead. So, if you ever really want to get into that, Brené Brown writes a book called Dare to Lead, which is just awesome. It talks about the vulnerability of leadership. So to answer your question, yes and no. There's been times where I reflect back and I go, "Oh, man, I really should have been a little bit harder on my person. I should have been a little bit tougher." But the thing that I always reflect back is you want the person there that you're talking about to walk away feeling what's the word I'm looking for? Validated. They want to walk away with their integrity. You don't want to ever feel like you belittled the person. So I always approach problems with kindness. So when I've had a person and I have a story that a person that I had spoken to multiple times about the same thing, and the first time was, hey, this is the thing, and the second time was, hey, we talked about this thing. Now we got to move to another level. And unfortunately, now we have to, call a union rep and we have to bring somebody in and have a formal conversation. And I have to document this conversation. After that conversation, I literally had the union rep, the person in front of me, and I had the letter, the memo that I was writing to the person. And after I did all of that, literally in the space, I looked at the person. I said, just understand that this doesn't change how I feel about you. Do you understand that I still care about you as a person, as a teacher? But at the end of the day, I have expectations and standards. And, you just did not meet the expectation and standard that we laid out. Doesn't change how I feel about you. I still love you, right? But I need you to kind of, think about these things. And the person at the time was like, oh yeah, 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 but didn't really quite get it, right? And then the union rep, at the end talked to me. It was like, I've never had an administrator. He used the word administrator. I've never had an administrator approach this like this. It's so just different. I said, well, I love my people, right? I just love my people. Kick the can down the road. A year or two. That particular person, became one of my greatest allies. Led the department, did some great things. Never did the thing that I talked about ever again and when I left the district, gave me the most beautiful like farewell, like I love you, I miss you, we're gonna miss you, you've done so much for us. So the story here is even though you might need to call people out on their stuff, right? You got to do that sometimes, as long as you can do it so they can walk away feeling like not demoralized, and they can maintain their integrity. I think that's the best way and it's hard because sometimes, people make mistakes and you really want to snap, right? You want to be like, oh, what are you crazy? But you got to stop yourself as a leader and understand, like, one of the things I say is place a 10 over people's heads. In their minds, they are trying their best. They are really trying their best. And if you truly believe that they're trying their best, you will treat them at their best, right? So they can walk away with their dignity, they can walk away with their pride, and they could never feel like you're demoralizing them as a person. Because if you do that, you'll never be able to win them over or lead them at all. So,
Yeah, to understand that some people just don't learn things the easy way, you
hmm
know, and things, sometimes have to be taken to an extreme where there's a union rep there for them to take it seriously and understand that it is a real problem, something that they have to dedicate to.
All right, so let's transition because we're just about 30 minutes into our RW rapid fire questions. So you ready for this, Dan?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So Dan had these beforehand, so you're ready. So who would you rather mentor? A teacher with incredible creativity but no organization, or one with a military precision but no passion?
Definitely somebody with that creative energy, for sure. But again, I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who's taught the arts their entire career.
Yeah.
Somebody with a passion for the arts and a great imagination and innovative styles of teaching excites me much more than somebody who's very organized. And I mean, you deal with creatives all the time. We're very quirky, and organization and neatness is not always uh, our our paramount quality.
Mhm.
So understanding that people who teach the arts and people who are identified as creatives are going to function outside of a traditional box is something that I think a leader, especially in the arts, has to appreciate in order to tolerate some of the behaviors um, of their people.
And to elaborate on that, I don't always like to jump in on the rapid fire questions, but as a leader, I think that thinking creatively helps my building principals and my district office because they don't oftentimes look at the things that we look at it. So I think that that's huge, that creativity piece. You talk about Ken Robinson. You talk about how we have to be creative in our problem solving, and I think our artists and our musicians, have an ability to do that. So here's number two for you. What's the
Before that,
most
Rob, don't you feel like I mean, teaching is special. Don't you feel like you're constantly defending, like every new initiative that comes out, you're like constantly defending why it's not going to fit correctly into the arts, or why the arts shouldn't have to adhere to those guidelines or those limitations,
Oftentimes, I find myself doing the opposite. I actually say to them, the arts have been doing this forever. It's about time you follow us. And they go, well, what do you mean? And then, like, so for instance, when they came out with the Common Core standards, right? They're like, oh, we got to dig deep into content. I'm like, well, we've been doing that for centuries, bro. Like, come to the art room and watch how an art teacher unpacks a strategy, and that strategy is infused into multiple projects, and they do it for the whole semester. Or a music teacher that's handing out a piece of music that's talking about a skill that's gone in for the whole 3 months or 4 months of work. They're like, we've been doing this forever. So it's about time you English teachers, math teachers catch up to what we've been doing, like just in a kind of a funny way. But yeah, it's almost like in a world of you're defending, but like, and for me, it's like you have to let them realize that we've been leading the way for years,
Yeah, like I
and
said, there's an art to everything, and
yeah.
if the question is art, the answer is everything.
That's right. That's right. So, so when you've been a teacher for many years, you've had a lot of observations from people. So what do you think is the most well-intentioned but useless piece of feedback that you've gotten from I use the word administrator rather than leader, in an observation?
I was just in a meeting with my chair, who um,
Hmm.
and we were talking about how we all need to be teaching the same thing. And this is probably this. I feel like many times in my career, I'm sitting in a meeting and I'm nodding my head, and in my own thoughts, I'm thinking, I'm never going to do that. That's not going to happen in my room because
Right.
that's going to disrupt. That goes against all the tenets of the way that I teach. So Robert Downey Jr. said sometimes you have to nod your head and agree, and then do what you were going to do anyway.
That's right.
So the worst piece of advice that I've gotten from somebody who's, I guess, considered my superior in some way was that you guys should all be teaching the same thing. And I do agree that we should be teaching the same subject matter, but I think that in the arts we should have the latitude to be able to teach it the way that we um, see it. You know, we should be able to teach it the way that our style, I guess, allows us to.
Yeah, and going back to your first original point a couple minutes ago, you teach to the kids. So if you have, what I call in my world a consensus map, so we all agree that we want kids to be able to do and know at the end of the year this thing, right? I don't care how you get there, so you should know your kids, so hey, if you feel like it should be through sculpture, you feel like it should be through drawing and painting, I don't really care as long as you get them there. And some kids are going to be different. You may have kids, Myron Dweck talks about how differentiating for kids. If you have a kid that's supposed to do an assessment and they're supposed to write an essay and they're going through a real struggle and they're like, you know what, or they have like a broken hand and they can't write an essay, right? Well, then here's a recorder. Record yourself speaking the essay, right? What's wrong with that? They're still giving you the content, so give them a way to get to the skills. So I totally agree with you. So my last rapid fire is kind of silly, So what would you prefer, a paintbrush or a glue gun for your kids?
Our conversation has kind of covered the gamut of what it is to be a great leader and what it is to be a great teacher. And I think that it at the most surface level, it boils down to being able to cultivate the skills to be able to think on your feet and creatively problem solve and come up with innovative ways to help your students learn in their, you know, according to the way that they learn. So I would say in answer to that question, it would depend on the project. If it was a project that required one or the other, I would choose one or the other. If it was a project that required both, I would use both
No, that's
strategy,
great.
both tools.
Yeah, yeah. No, I gotcha. So let's our final mic drop closer question here. It's a fill in the blank. So I think it's funny because it really ties into a lot of the things we've been talking about today. So the here we go. The best leaders in school aren't always the ones with the title, but are the ones who dot dot dot.
I think there's also a moment in every teacher's career, pardon me, where they say to themselves, um, am I doing it? Am I making it happen? And it's usually when your energy is at its lowest, or your tank is the closest to E, right? And we've all had the experience where in those moments a student walks through your door, maybe from high school, maybe from college, maybe as an adult outside of their educational experience, and they say to you these words: Mr. Wadua, you were the only teacher who ever dot dot dot. And for that, I thank you. And you helped shape my life. You are one of the reasons I am who I am today. And if you ever hear that from a student, no matter when it is in your career, you're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, super well said, and I know that you've had those moments from students. I've had those moments from students. I have tons of stories, and my most recent, success is and I hope to have this person on my podcast. So if this person is listening, that person knows who they are. I had a student that I taught for many, many years, in band. That student then went on to be a music educator major, became a music therapist, and then I actually hired this person in my previous district as a band teacher. And as I'm mentoring this person, the person had said to me, you had shaped me not only as a student, as a musician, but now you're shaping me as a teacher. And it was like, full circle, and I just ran into this person at a festival recently, and they gave me a huge hug. They're like, "Oh my goodness, we miss you." And I hope to have them on as a guest because they are just tremendous, tremendous thing. But those are the success stories that we have, there's far and few between as a teacher. I feel like you get those Facebook messages or you get an email. As a leader, that for me was complete full circle, teacher, all the way around, so super awesome. So, Dan, I really do appreciate you being on this episode of Mentoring Moments. You have so much insight and so many great things to say, and I know that you're going to, if you jump into the leadership world, I know you're going to be working to lead with empathy and guide, whether it's art instruction, art leadership, or even if you become, you want to become an assistant principal or principal, you will take all the creativity you have and really care for the people that you lead. So, any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our amazing audience?
Um, Nothing I can think of off the top of my head, but I would like to thank you for having me on, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I think we definitely talked about some important things. And, like you said, the day to day of teaching is an arduous task. It's oftentimes very thankless and, difficult, emotionally draining. Sometimes it leaks into your private life. But I think that teachers who are passionate, like yourself, and teachers and leaders who understand that people are individuals and have lives are so important to this profession. And I think that if more people like you were in a position of leadership, that it would certainly change the dynamic for the better.
Thanks so much, Dan. I appreciate it, and thanks for being here. And we'll sign off and see everybody soon. Thanks so much, Dan, and we'll catch up
Thank you,
soon.
everyone.